Hello students, good morning. Look at the board and do your morning checklist and we will begin our day. The morning checklist will be hang backpack and coat and cubby, fill out your daily planner, fill up all water bottles and use the restroom if you need to, and then when you're done with all of that, silent read. Alright everyone, I need everyone in their seats by the count of 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Thank you. Today we'll be reading a story about a famous biologist who struggled and did lots of research and had many accomplishments. Ernest Everett Just. Quickly and quietly, I would like everyone to find a spot on the carpet in the reading corner. Okay. Today we will be reading the story The Vast Wonder of the World, biologist Ernest Everett Just by Melina Mungal. And this is what that looks like. So before we start reading, I want you guys to look at the cover and think about what you notice. What do we notice? We notice there are some things floating. We notice that might look like water and some dirt. You notice a guy standing right here who has a coat on, kind of like a lab coat. Alright, now before we start reading, who can remind me of what a biologist is? Yes. A biologist is someone who studies life, kind of like a type of scientist. I think we're spot on. What are some things that they study more specifically? Animals, yes. Animals. What kind of animals? All animals or just deer? All animals. Do they study cells? Yes, they do study cells. Alright, and as we look at the cover, what do we think vast means? What do we think vast means? Do you think it's small or big? Because what if we read this? It says, the vast wonder of the world. Do we think the world is small or big? Big. So anytime we see vast, that means it's big. It's big, long, super large. And then, do we know anything about Ernest Everett Just? Does anyone know anything about him? We can infer that he might be a biologist, but do we know what kind of biologist he is based on the cover? Not really. We can kind of see some cells maybe. There might be some ocean life on here, maybe. Alright, Now, before we begin reading, I want you guys to know that there are many big words that might be unknown to you guys. If anyone has any questions about a word or phrase, you can ask me while we are reading when I finish a page. Please do not interrupt my reading. Ask when I am showing you guys the picture after I read. Okay. So, The Vast Wonder of the World. Biologist Ernest Everett Just by Melina Mungal. Illustrations by Louisa Uribe. To start, Woods Hole, Massachusetts, 1911. At twilight, a man lay on a dock, luring marine worms with a lantern. He scooped them out with his net and placed them in a bucket. He couldn't wait to look at them more closely. Twilight is right between like right where sunset is, when the sun is either right before the sun is rising or right after the sun is setting. He knew the ways of the sea, though he was not a fisherman. His grandfather had built wharves, but he was not a dock worker. His name was Ernest Everett Just, and he was a scientist. Ernest was not like other scientists. He saw the whole where others saw only parts. He noticed details others failed to see. On the dock at dawn, he wrote poetry. This is where I would show a picture. Back in his laboratory, Ernest examined the marine worms under the microscope. He recorded and sketched their movements. How do their tiny egg cells create new life? He wondered. At a time when few expected a black man to do so well, Ernest became the world authority on how life begins from an egg. From early on, Ernest wondered about the world of water around him. Born in Charleston, South Carolina, where rivers and ocean meet, Ernest watched how fishermen netted their catch. He learned how to read from his schoolteacher mother. After his father died when he was 4, he learned how hard life could be. To find better paying work, Ernest's mother moved their family from the city across the river to the country. Soon after, Ernest caught typhoid fever. He survived, but he had lost his ability to read. He cried alone, struggling to relearn it all. Then one day, a miracle. Ernest could read again. He read as often as he could, letting his imagination roam. Words came to life as magical spirits. Ernest attended the school his mother created in the town she also established. Ernest's mother never stopped working. Ernest never stopped observing. Even while cooking, cleaning, and watching his younger brother and sister. He observed how a hurricane damaged their school, how tougher segregation laws restricted African Americans, and how his mother's remarriage changed life at home. What Ernest really loved to observe, though, was nature. Surrounded by rivers and ocean, marsh, and mud, he found plenty to explore. At 13, Ernest left home to attend boarding school in Orangeburg, South Carolina. It was here he published his first poem. When he graduated, Ernest returned home, hoping to begin teaching in his mother's school. But a fire had destroyed it. Ernest left the segregated South on a steamship to continue his education up north. He dove into his new classes at a college preparatory school in New Hampshire. While he was away, his mother fell ill with tuberculosis and died. Ernest was stunned. Full of grief and confusion, Ernest did the only thing he knew to do, return to his studies. He went on to Dartmouth College, working to pay his own way and to support his brother and sister back home. With less time to study, Ernest failed a class. He thought of his family and how they depended on him. He thought of his mother's hard work and belief in education. He had to keep going. Ernest took a biology class, and his life changed forever. In that class, he discovered the microscopic world of the cell. Scientists knew that the cell is the smallest building block of life, but many had only a basic understanding of how the different parts of the cell worked together as new life developed. Ernest wanted to unlock this mystery. And he did. Ernest became a biology professor at Howard University in Washington, D.C., teaching students to question and observe. Each summer, he traveled to the Marine Biological Laboratory in Woods Hole, Massachusetts, to research and experiment. Out on the collecting boat, Ernest looked for sea urchins, sand dollars, starfish, and marine worms. He then carefully transported them to the lab in a covered bucket so the beating sun would not damage them. Most scientists carelessly remove sea animals to study, but Ernest demonstrated that by observing living things in a natural in as natural an environment as possible, they could learn more. Ernest also taught scientists how to thoroughly cleanse glassware and equipment for the most accurate experiments. Using a simple light microscope, Ernest examined the egg cells of those sea animals. Night after night, day after day, while observing sand dollar eggs, Ernest noticed a wave of movement when a sperm contacted the egg. As slight as a shiver, it signaled an amazing discovery. The egg cell directed its own development during fertilization. This controversial idea went against what most scientists thought at the time. It wasn't just the sperm creating changes, the cell surface and the layer right below it were just as important in generating new life. Ernest published his research findings in many scientific papers. He traveled to conferences to share his ideas, and he won the first NAACP Spingarn Medal. As his reputation grew, Ernest's ideas caught the attention of scientists around the world. He was the first American research scientist invited to the world-famous Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Berlin, Germany. From then on, Ernest worked in Europe as often as long as he could, enjoying more warmth and respect than he'd ever felt in America. Despite his accomplishments, Ernest felt increasingly stifled in the United States. His family was not welcome with him in Massachusetts because of the color of their skin. He struggled for basic laboratory equipment at Howard. He didn't have the freedom white scientists had to choose where they worked. The time came when Ernest refused to tolerate the segregation any longer. He decided to move to France and become an independent researcher. Crossing the Atlantic, Ernest thought about the hundreds of students he'd introduced to science and how his fascination with cells began. He poured those memories and feelings into his work and completed a groundbreaking book. Through his careful observations and hard work, Ernest opened up the wonder of the universe to all of us through a tiny egg cell. The end. Okay. Now, next steps. You guys will quietly go back to your desks, and on your way, I want you to grab a dictionary and a pencil. I will pass out some graphic organizers for our vocabulary words for today from our story. When you get your paper, put your name on it and wait for further instructions. So, what's step 1? Grab a dictionary. Step 2. Go to your desk and pull out a pencil. 3. Write your name on your paper. And 4. Wait patiently and quietly for further directions. Understand? Okay, go. Okay, I will pass out these papers. And they will put their names on the top. Okay. Alright, today our first word is struggle. We're going to write the word struggle in our first box. And ideally I'd be doing this on a document camera, but I do not have one at home. So under word, we'll write struggle. Alright, in our next box, directly below, it says, what is it? This is where we will put our meaning of the word based on our context clues from the book. Struggle came at the beginning of our book. Let me read it. To find better paying work, Ernest's mother moved their family from the city across the river to the country. Soon after, Ernest caught typhoid fever. He survived, but he had lost his ability to read. He cried alone. struggling to relearn it all. So the book says struggling, but we are learning the word struggle. What can we write for the word struggle? What is it? So the rest of the lesson will be going through this graphic organizer. They'll write the word, what it is, based on the book. What are some examples of struggle? And what is it like to struggle? Or some synonyms of struggle. And then what is it like to struggle, like to fight with something that is difficult and have to grapple on how to overcome it. And we use a dictionary to find synonyms. Then on the back of their paper, I would have them write a sentence to struggle in similar context to the way we read it. So in this context, he was struggling after he got sick. So right now I could say that I am struggling to talk because I have a sore throat and a bad cough. Which is similar, except for his struggle is a lot deeper than mine. And then after we finish the whole paper together, I'll have them check their sentences with me so that I know that they are understanding what I'm asking them to do. By putting it in a sentence, it's longer than I struggled or the dog struggled to walk. It needs to be a little bit longer. And then I'll check them off. And then in partners, together I would have them do the same thing. I'll give them each 3 of these papers in a packet. They'll do the same thing for research and accomplishments. And ideally I'll have more than one book and a physical book for them to actually look at while I'm reading. And then the graphic organizer is how I'll assess their understanding of the word and of the vocabulary word. I'll use their sentences. And this will allow me to see if they understood the meaning of the word as it was presented in the book in that context. And that'll be my evidence and assessment. Thank you.